In terms of my experience coming in, I always like to think of it as being both racial and cultural minority. And that I was hit with that from the get-go, starting in first year, sitting in class, getting hit with a slew of information. We all know we have so much of it. But I could relate with my peers with how extensive the information was. But there's something I realized that stood out for me. And that was when the professors tried to relate and give us references. So if a concept was difficult, they would give us references for us to understand. The light bulb would hit for my peers, but not for me, because I realized a lot of the references that they used weren't things that I grew up with, were not part of my culture. So I had to deal with both of those things, with the vast amount of information that we were getting, but also trying to learn what the references were so that I could also get the light bulb moment. But eventually, I learned that maybe it's best that I find my own references. Sometimes well, right now we're dealing with another uptick of racial violence in police. I think early on in vet school, it was happening often, and I think that was very hard for me to deal with. And I felt like it's very hard for me to talk about, especially if I didn't find people who look like me. Eventually, I put myself out there. There are other students of color who felt the same exact way, that they felt there was this lump in your throat. You're coming to school every day with this weight, and you're not able to digest it or recover from whatever trauma that it could bring. So I found that community was really essential, I think. I think my experiences with clinics had been interesting. I would say that for the most part, it's been kind of just similar to colleagues, but there were instances that stood out to me. One instance, I think, was so critical that the client ended up being banned from the hospital, or fired, as we say it. And that client had been so openly vocal and verbal in their kind of disrespect of my person. And I saw the immediate shift when they spoke to colleagues of mine. And I was the only Black person in the scene, or openly visible person of color. And I think that was difficult for me. Again, if I could go back to the community aspect, it's really important to have a community or to be able to validate that experience. I think it was, I would say it's around the end of clinic, we had a large animal clinical rotation where there was a client who, I think, while I was trying to retrieve information, was being very off-putting. More, I felt they weren't really open to speaking with me. No eye contact, you could see the body language. And I also noticed a shift, again, from speaking with me to speaking with my colleagues. And again, in the question of validation, I asked if any of my colleagues had experienced this or if they saw it. And I think it was a unanimous denial. So I think in that experience, I noticed maybe sometimes it's best not to seek validation from people who don't experience it. So at the time, I tried to seek it, and I think I was looking for them to say, I think I saw that she was acting a bit weird with you, and not with me, but nobody had said it. So I think in that instance, again, I just reinforced how important validation is.